Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Jessie and today we are talking about the books that I read in the month of January. So I started off this reading year with reading 11 books in January, which I'm really excited about. My goal was to hit 8, so yay. In terms of star ratings for this past month, I read a total of 1 2-star book, 2 3-star books, 2 3.5-star books, 1 4-star book, 3 4.5-star books, and 1 5-star book. So my ratings were all over the place this month, but overall a very strong reading month, I would say. And then in terms of the genre breakdowns, I read a total of 5 fantasy books, 2 thrillers, 1 historical fiction, 1 dystopian, 1 sci-fi, and 1 contemporary. So heavy on the fantasy, but that's my jam. So let's talk about the books that I read in the order of the one I liked the least and working my way up to the one I loved the most. In January, my least favorite book, unfortunately, was Vengeance Road by Erin Bowman. This was the historical fiction young adult book that I read. I don't know how to classify this book because it's a Western and it's not fantasy at all, but I don't know how to classify this book. Is it historical fiction? I don't know. So this book basically follows this young girl who her father is murdered by this horrible gang of villains and she's going out for revenge for her father. And she's journeying across this western desert land with these guys who are helping her find these criminals and potentially leading to a treasure trove of gold. This to me read very young for young adults, and it just didn't have a whole lot to say. And it's such a bummer because I was really looking forward to reading something very unique from this genre because I never read a Western before, and this just was not it for me. I thought that the main characters were all pretty blah. None of them really stood out to me as exciting characters that I really wanted to root for. And the journey itself that these characters take is rather boring, which is weird because this is a pretty short book and it's written in a fast-paced way, but I just wasn't very interested and I wasn't excited to pick this one up. So it did get 2 stars from me. I'm really bummed. I won't be continuing on with this series, unfortunately. So this for me was a no-go. Next book I have that I was a little meh on was Cross Her Heart by Sarah Pinborough. This did receive 3 stars from me. I picked this up because I read Behind Her Eyes by this same author and loved the twist in that book. I thought it was so absurd and crazy and it just blew my mind. I loved it. So Cross Her Heart was not nearly as thrilling, it wasn't nearly as unique, and it didn't stand out in any way from the other thrillers that are out there. It was a story about a woman who is kind of exploring her past and trying to figure out, I don't even remember what this book is about. That is so sad. Overall, just a pretty big letdown for me, especially after reading Behind Her Eyes and loving it so much. So if you have read Behind Her Eyes, I would say skip this one. I am gonna still check out what else this author has that's coming up. I know she has a new book that's being released, Dead to Her, which sounds very, very good. So I'm definitely still interested in this author and what she has to bring to the genre, but this wasn't it. Didn't stand out in any way. The next book I have is Gathering Blue by Lois Lowry, which is the second book in the Giver Quartet. And this one just completely lacked the original magic that the Giver had. It was still a pretty good book. It was very fast-paced. It's so short. So I definitely got through it in one sitting. And the main character that we follow in this book, even though it's not Jonas from The Giver, I still really liked this main character. I know what this book is trying to say. It just didn't quite have that same magic. And I was missing the world building and the cool, unique aspects of The Giver that I loved so much. I was missing all of that in Gathering Blue. The world building wasn't as unique and creative, and it lacked that magic. I don't know how else to describe it, but I am still interested in reading the rest of the Giver Quartet, because I hear that even though the 3 books leading up to the finale are all kind of their own separate stories, the 4th book kind of wraps them all together and finishes off the series with a nice little bow. So I'm still interested in finishing this series. This one just wasn't as strong as the Giver for me. Get ready for an unpopular opinion. Yeah. This next book got 3.5 stars from me, and I still don't know totally how I feel about it. And that is Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. Okay, I'm confused. What age range is this book for? I mean, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. A book is a book and a story is a story that can be enjoyed by all ages. But who's the target audience for this? Is this considered young adult? Because at times, this read very adult to me, and then at times it read very like middle grade. So I was like, what is the tone of this book? It was so bizarre. I could not figure out like where this would be shelved on, like at a bookstore. What is this book? And it was very odd. How do I explain this book? It's a portal fantasy about children who return from magical worlds that they visited. I think like Narnia, Wonderland. They have this school where they all are kind of come together and help each other cope with being stuck in this world. And I liked the imagination that was present in this book. I thought it was super imaginative how we have different worlds that all have like different directions and different kind of like we had nonsense as one direction versus logic as another direction. It was very fascinating how we like broke these worlds up and how each world was unique to that character, and like what that character needed was the world that they got. So I thought that whole aspect was so unique, which is why it ended up getting the 3.5 stars. But it wasn't a 5-star book or even a 4-star book for me, because the characters were lacking, and granted we don't have a lot of time with them in this book for them to really make a deep connection with me. So I didn't like fall in love with any of these characters, and the plot itself was kind of bizarre. Like it was interesting that like we have such a cool world and idea, and yet we chose to go with like this murder mystery plot. It was very odd. I don't know. I feel like I'm very much in the minority here. Everyone I've seen read this book has loved it, like 5 stars all around. So I would still recommend this to everybody, and just be forewarned that there are times where it's going to read very adult, and then there are times where it's going to sound like a middle grade novel. And I don't know what it's supposed to be. So I don't know. It's a fantasy. And it's very imaginative. It has a lot of potential. I'm excited to continue on with the series. I'm definitely going to still continue on. But it was just odd that this ended up being a murder mystery. Very odd. The next one I have is Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor, and this also received 3.5 stars from me. Strange the Dreamer received 4 stars, and I really, really loved Strange the Dreamer. Muse of Nightmares, although it was still very good and wrapped up the duology very well, it just at times was very, very repetitive. Like I felt like the first 100 pages of this book could have been shortened, because it was just a lot of a recap of what happened at the end of Strange the Dreamer that was just being regurgitated to us through like cheesy kind of corny dialogue, and like the back and forth between Minya and Laszlo was just so over the top, so ridiculous. Like that went on for like too long. So if we had just like kind of gotten into the actual meat of this story sooner, I think it would have received a higher rating from me. And I loved that we concentrated more on Minya in this story. I think she was a really compelling character. I really sympathized with her and felt bad for her in this story. So I'm glad that I read this one. I'm glad that I wrapped it up, but it just wasn't quite the same magic as Strange the Dreamer. And it introduced things that were very much out of left field. Like there was a discovery, if you will, in this book that really changes a lot. And I wish we had had more time with that discovery to really flesh it out, because it was told to us like kind of towards the end of this book, and then you're like, well, we only have 100 pages left, and now we have this humongous discovery about this world that changes everything, and we didn't really flesh that out much. So again, I thought it was good. It's not my favorite. I feel like a Laini Taylor book is just never going to get 5 stars from me because I just don't love her writing style. I know it's so beloved by so many, so I would always recommend this series to others because most people I see love her writing style, love the flowery writing. I just personally don't. It's not my favorite. So the writing style, just kind of the slow pace at the beginning, some of the cheesy dialogue, and then that discovery at the end that kind of like, it came out of nowhere. It was very bizarre. So overall, like this one, would recommend the duology, but I'm curious to see what everyone else thought of this one. I'm very curious. Right, getting into my 4-star books. Okay, I'm gonna start off saying I pre-ordered this prior to all of the discussion coming out on this book. So I'm not going to comment on any of that, and I'm just going to talk just 100% about the content of this book. So if you're interested in seeing what else is out there on this book and the other discussion being had, please go look at Instagram, go look at Twitter, go look at all the articles, because there's a lot of discussion, but it's not going to be talked about right here, right now, because I just want to kind of talk about this book. So this one received 4 stars from me, and I thought it was going to receive 5. So American Dirt follows Lydia, a mother who, with her son, survives this horrible thing that happens to their family and is trying to flee Mexico because this drug cartel is after them and they're trying to get to America. I thought that what this book is trying to do and say is very important. I loved that aspect of it. There were some moments in this book that were truly gripping and so thrilling and just had you on the edge of your seat and just really made you feel all the things. But it didn't receive 5 stars because I think the format of this story just kind of didn't connect to me as much. So how it's written is we start out with the big tragedy right away. Like that's the first thing that we read in this book is this humongous tragedy that happens to this family. And immediately Lydia and her son are on the run. So then throughout the book, you get these scattered flashbacks of kind of what led up to that tragedy. And the problem with that format and why I don't like it in most books is because you already know where these characters are going to be in those flashbacks, so you don't feel as invested in the flashbacks and like the journey to that tragedy as you would if those hadn't been told in flashbacks and had just been a part of the narrative. So it like almost made me disconnected from this family prior to their tragedy because we knew where they were going to end up. So I didn't feel like I wanted to like follow their story and like get invested because I knew what was going to happen. And I'm trying not to spoil anything. So I'm like purposely kind of tiptoeing around this tragedy. So that was one kind of complaint was I didn't love that this was told in flashbacks. And then the other kind of writing style thing that I didn't love was we jump into the heads of a lot of different characters in this book. We never get a clear way to define when we're in someone's head. So like in one paragraph, we're in the mother's head, and then without any sort of notice, we're all of a sudden in the son's head. And it was like very jarring because you're like, wait a minute, who are we following now? Like whose perspective is this? Like what am I following? So that for me didn't work quite as well as it could have if we had just had like certain chapters dedicated to that character or paragraph breaks or something to like indicate that like, okay, now you're in another character's head. So that was very jarring for me and took me out of the story a couple times because I was just like, I don't know who we're following at this point. And I had to like reread those paragraphs. The other thing is this book leads up to this like showdown of sorts where our main character knows the main guy in the drug cartel, and that's not a spoiler, that's a part of the synopsis. She was actually friends with the guy who runs this drug cartel in their town of Mexico, in Acapulco, and it's almost like it builds to this showdown, and then when that finally happens, it's so lackluster and disappointing. I was almost like, why even do it if it's just gonna be that? Like, I was so disappointed with how this like showdown ended. And I know that's not what the book was about whatsoever. Like, that is not what's important in this book. But it was something that I was like rooting for. I was like, yes, do it. Oh, and it didn't happen. And again, I'm being very vague on purpose. So I mean, there are just a couple things that, like, if the writing style had been a little bit different, or the format of the story had been a little bit different, this really could have been 5 stars and it could have connected with me so much more. And like, this book should have been one that like made me cry and like made me really feel all the feels, and it didn't. And I think it's because of how it was told. I just didn't connect as much as I wanted to with the characters and their journey. Those are my complaints with this book. Again, I'm talking specifically about the content of this book. I'm not talking about anything surrounding this book. I'm not talking about the author herself. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm just talking about the book I read. So that's what I thought of American Dirt. 4 out of 5 stars. Do I recommend it? Yes, but there are, I'm sure, so many other books. I would love to hear some more recommendations of this type of story down below if you have any that are more maybe authentic and told from own voices. So if you have those, please share them down below. But that is American Dirt, and I am moving on. The next 4-star book I have is This Savage Song by Victoria Schwab, which is the first young adult book I have read by this author. I've read all of her adult stuff, as you can see, it's all right here, and I love it. So I was very excited to read her young adult stuff, and it does read very different. It's not nearly as detailed and descriptive as her adult stuff, which is a bummer because I love her adult stuff. So I'm always going to prefer, I think, V.E. Schwab's writing versus Victoria Schwab's writing, because I like her in the adult space. I like what she gets to explore a little bit more. But that being said, this was still very good. I really enjoyed it. I loved the concept in this book. What I loved about this story is the world and the world building that Victoria Schwab does. I love the concept of these monsters being born from horrific things that happen. So you have 3 different types of monsters in this world. Monsters that eat people, monsters that eat blood, like vampires, and monsters that eat souls. So different types of horrific events are what create these different types of monsters. So something like a murder would create one of the like vampire type monsters. Something like a mass tragedy would create the soul eating monsters. So depending on the level of the horrific thing that happens, that's what creates these monsters. That's how these monsters are born. And I loved that idea. I thought it was so cool, so well done. Victoria Schwab always has these like nuggets of ideas that she is just able to expand on, and they're so unique and so captivating, and I love her world building so much. The character of August in this book is wonderful. I think everyone can love August and get behind him. Kate is a little bit harder to get behind, but once she has some momentum, I kind of started liking her. So overall, I really enjoyed this. It's not my favorite book ever, but it was definitely a good one, and I am actually now reading Our Dark Duet. So I'm excited to see where these characters go from here, and I would recommend this to any young adult fantasy fans. Okay, getting into my 4.5-star books. Oh my god, this video is so long. I gotta hurry it up. So the first one is The Oracle Year by Charles Sewell. I was so shocked by this one. No one talks about this book. It is so good. Okay, so this is like a sci-fi thriller, which if you watched my Things I Love in Books video, you know I love sci-fi thrillers. I love that stuff. This is about a man who's super ordinary. It's like a bassist in a band, and he wakes up one day with 108 predictions in his head of things that are going to happen in the future, in the next 3 years. So he starts publishing these predictions anonymously on this website. And once these predictions start coming true, people start taking notice, and a lot of very important people start taking notice. So all of a sudden, you've got this character who is on the run from many different people, and it's just so fascinating. It's a really cool study into society and what would happen in this situation, and it's really, really cool, and I loved it. And I know it's not a perfect book. I know I've seen some reviews, and it didn't have the best reviews on Goodreads, so this is totally just me being in the minority once again on a book, but I thought this was a ton of fun. I read it so quickly. This was actually supposed to be in my February TBR, and I was like, oh, I'll get a head start on my February TBR and just like kind of start reading some of this. And I ended up reading the whole thing before February because I was so excited about it and loved it. It's just really fast paced. I will say this is probably not going to be for you if you don't like more political thrillers that follow like viewpoints of FBI officers and agents and like a priest at a church, and just it does get pretty political, and I would say that this is definitely not for everybody, and I can see the criticisms. I get it. I know that the ending of this book is so far-fetched and so crazy, but I loved it. I loved devouring this book. I had so much fun with it. So if you're just looking for like a fun ride where you can just like suspend your disbelief for a while and just have fun reading a carefree book, then I would definitely recommend The Oracle Year, because it's just a ton of fun. The next book I have is King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo. I'm so happy I loved this one. I have a full review of it that I will link down below, so I'm not going to go too much into it in this video, but I will say that this picks up right where we left off from Ruin and Rising. You do have to have read Six of Crows duology and the whole Shadow and Bone trilogy in order to read this book. Oh my god, if you don't read those two, you're gonna miss so much. You're gonna be spoiled for so much. But this book is great. I love that we're following Nikolai. Zoya is such an awesome character. I loved her in this book. I thought it had a pretty slow start, which was why it got the 4.5 instead of the 5. It took a while to get going, but once we did get going, it had me. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time until the very end, and let's talk about that ending. Whoa! Talk about a cliffhanger. I am so excited for the second book in this series. Why don't we have a release date for it yet? I am dying. I almost say wait to read this book until the second book comes out, or at least has a release date, because you will be blown away by the ending in this book. The cliffhanger is so real. It's so real. So definitely recommend this one if you love the Shadow and Bone trilogy and the Six of Crows duology. If you love the Grishaverse, I think you'll like this, but it definitely leaves off on a very, very big cliffhanger, and I loved it. Then the last 4.5 star book I have is Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. What? This isn't 5 stars? What, Jessie? What are you talking about? I know, I can't believe this isn't 5 stars. It was on my 5-star predictions. I got 4.5 stars from me, and let me explain why. This is the third book in the Stormlight Archive series, which is I'm still saying that is my favorite fantasy series of all time. Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, both got 5 stars. This one got 4.5, which is still really good. This is almost a perfect book. So I love this series, and I will stand by it until the end of time. But Oathbringer for me was the slowest of the series so far. This one, for me, I felt my mind wandering the most, and I think it's because Kaladin is my favorite character in the series, and we had much less Kaladin in this book. I loved the Dalinar flashbacks and all of his story. I loved that. But I will say Shallan's chapters were a little bit slower for me and a little bit harder to get into. I really like her as a character. I just thought her storyline in this particular book was just a little bit more boring than past books, which I'm super bummed to say. But overall, this book is still wonderful. I loved it. I loved Eleanor so much. I love Kaladin still. I love Bridge 4. I just love so much about this book. And the ending is so wonderful. Brandon Sanderson knows how to write an ending. I love his endings in all these books. They're always so epic. So I still highly recommend the Stormlight Archive series. Even though this isn't my absolute favorite in the series, it was still so much fun to read. Okay, and we're finally at the last book. Sorry, this is so long. And that is my only 5-star book this month, but so deserving of the 5 stars, and that is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. How have I not read this book? I can't believe it. I had watched the movie years ago, and I slightly remembered the movie. I kind of remembered one of the twists in the movie, but I didn't remember how it ended. I didn't remember how he got to that twist. So I'd forgotten so much of it, and I was like, okay, I think I've forgotten enough of the movie now where I can enjoy the book and just read it and be surprised all over again. And I was, and I'm so happy I read this book. It is incredible. I can see why everyone was talking about this book for so long, and it still stands as one of the most iconic thriller books in the genre. I totally get it now, and it's because the character of Amy is so captivating and so creepy and genius, and just that cool girl monologue had me shaking. It was so good. I could gush about this book for years. It is so good. If you have somehow not read this book and not seen the movie and not been spoiled, oh my god, this should be your next read if you're a big thriller fan, because I'm so jealous of you that you have not been spoiled for this and you get to enjoy it, because it is so epic. I loved this book. This will probably go down as one of my favorite thrillers of all time. That was a lot. That was a lot of books. So sorry that this video is forever long. If you made it to the end, yay, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And until next time, bye!